Hide your kids, hide your wives. They don't need to hide from me. I'm not gonna do nothing. I'm not doing nothing. How's it going, Steely? How's it going? I was just planning on trying to sell myself here, trying to share my live streamingness. Live now. So I will do that momentarily. Hide your husbands? Hide them all. Everybody hide. Nobody. No fun gonna swoop in and snatch them up. Oh no. Oh no. Just put myself out there and everybody's self-promo, because why not? What's the worst that could happen? What is the... Well, the worst is I get kicked out of some communities, but who cares, right? Who cares? Alrighty. I think that's pretty much all the places I can post into, or that I did. Alrighty. Alright. That's what the channel is for anyway. I mean, yeah, you'd think so, right? you'd think that self-promos would be for self-promos, but I know some people get a little bit antsy in the pantsy with promoting that kind of stuff. Is what it is, I guess. It is what it is. Alrighty. Let me fix up a few more things, and then we can get started on answering all those questions, because people got questions and they need answers. And of course, you all are free to ask away as well. That's the whole point. It's supposed to be interactive. It's supposed to be live. We're supposed to be streaming here. We're supposed to be having a back and forth convo, aren't we? Alrighty. If the person isn't active in the community, I could see being flustered. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty bad about not being active, like, text-wise, because I just don't like text. But I know nowadays people mostly like text, specifically in Discords, because I'm in a ton of Discords. No voice chats are ever active, ever. all Discords are just, people having combos back and forth over, like, you get like 3 sentences in over the course of like 24 hours. Alrighty. Speaking of, I got a bunch of emails, didn't I? Let's take a look at those. Perfect. Oh, no, not perfect. I didn't mark one of them. Alrighty. I'm very much someone that likes to never have any, like, messages unlooked at or anything. That's why I'm actually got these little check boxes on this, so that when I'm done I can go boop. So it looks all nice and proper. Very much so. If I ever see any messages or any things pop up, I don't like having unseen or unreads or anything of that nature. Alrighty. No fun. Would love to stick around, but this ass o'clock for me, and I'm about to pass out on the keyboard. Good luck with the stream. I mean, that's the unfortunate part of being on the West Coast is that I don't appeal to a lot of Europeaners, sadly. So sorry about that. Maybe I'll try and get a live stream earlier at some point. So fancy. What is the best advice you can give to new DMs? Here is my best advice for new DMs. You're going to suck. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. As a new DM, you are going to suck. It's going to be miserable. You're going to do some things you don't like. You're going to do some things that aren't cool. You're going to allow things that just, upon reflection, really just you shouldn't have allowed. But that's the nature of it. Riding, this is like riding a bike. You are going to fall, but eventually you're going to get good. The difference between a new DM and a good DM, no, maybe I shouldn't say that. I think what separates a good DM from a not good DM is learning from those experiences. Because a not good DM is going to continue to do the same things that a new DM did. A bad DM is going to continue to make the same mistakes over and over and refuse to learn from them. But a good DM is going to have that self-reflection and say, ooh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, I shouldn't have allowed this. I should have ran it this way. I should have done da-da-da, so-and-so. Having that reflection there is going to separate you from the people that refuse to learn. And that is my advice for new DMs. What's up, Rivers? Question, what you got planned this weekend? This weekend, I am running a game. I'm hanging out with folks. I am doing a whole bunch of DM prep. I'm doing a whole bunch of channel prep. I'm doing a whole bunch of writing. Pretty standard stuff, I guess. Not doing anything out the ordinary. Alrighty. So without further ado, let's look at these questions I've got listed here because I asked in my Discord, hey, if anybody's got any questions for this, go ahead and list them down. So I've got it. Okay, here's some. You planning on reviewing more OSR systems? Are you planning on allowing others to run some games on your Discord server? What is the number one system you're looking to try at the moment? We'll probably come up with some more later. Alrighty, so multi-tiered question here. Are you planning on reviewing more OSR systems? Yes. If you have been watching my channel and looking at all the videos recently, I delved into making shorts and I've slowed down a lot of my content because December and January were relatively busy and I had a lot of things going on. I will go back to making my regularly scheduled programs. I've just been really busy. And I do, in fact, plan on covering some OSR systems because there's a lot of OSR systems that I love and I need to show off the ones that I've already showed off in a better light. Are you planning on allowing others to run games in your server? Yeah. I would love for people to run games in my server to enhance more people, just making it more active. And what is the number one system you're looking to try at the moment? There is a system I've looked at and I really want to run called Hypertolarians. That one is basically, the best way to describe it is it's a sci-fi space opera. It incorporates a lot of the themes of the OSR, but it also has a lot of unique features and a lot of the art is just beautiful for it. And while art isn't necessarily indicative of the game system, art does derive what you're supposed to be doing with the game system. Much like how 5e has characters looking, like powerful and mighty, and the old school art has heroes not even being heroes. They're like getting beat up and eaten, killed, and whatever. So I'm looking to run Hypertolarians. I've seen in the past that you let people know if they are interested in running a game with you. How do you actually sign up for a game with you? So I'll do a better job of that. In my Discord, I'm going to have public events listed, basically just saying, hey, if you want to join in on the games, just hop on in. Whether that be you signing up or just showing up on the day. Because I've been running, I've ran actually a decent amount of one-shots recently for a bunch of people in my community. And that's been a ton of fun. So check out my Discord for all that, and I'll also make a video about it too, because I want to run a West Marches game sometime in the future. Don't TPK the party when they are leaving, learning how to play. Definitely, I'll tell you this, if you are trying to run a game where it's not punishing, then don't TPK them. Though I will say, if you get like 4 people that show up to the table and they say, hey, we don't want you to take it easy on us. We want to lose if we're acting stupid. Then yeah, TPK him. But in most cases, I would say not TPK the party. Hello, Channel Zero. Just want to say hi and keep up the good work. Thank you, Volo. Alrighty, next question. Rolling for stats or a point buy? So when it comes to making stats for characters, what I'll say is point buy is just the absolute neatest, fairest way to go about allowing people to make the characters they want to make. But unfortunately, or maybe not unfortunately, but what I've noticed running so many different players and so many different games is that people get fixated on making that character. And what do I mean by that character? I mean, a lot of people get fixated on making an idea. And unfortunately, when it comes to running our games and playing with other players, I don't want ideas. I want something a bit more concrete. And with point buy, people make characters that serve this one purpose and this one function. They do this thing and they can do that and that. And quite frankly, I find that if you just simply roll for stats, you have less freedom, of course, because you are dictated by where the dice land. But that restriction allows for more creativity in regards of, okay, I've got these 2 really bad stats. I've got this one really good stat. I've got, so-and-so. How do I go about allocating that? And that's especially true if you force people to roll dice down the line. If their first roll is a strength and the next one's a dex and et cetera, et cetera. If you have that super duper rigidity of forcing people to keep a stat, it allows for a bit more creativity in how they approach making the character. So, all in all, I would say rolling for stats I prefer more, but I completely understand why a lot of people, air quote, want and need that creative freedom of point buy. Awesome, thanks. I do begin to reflect almost as soon as I finish. That's good. That's good, and you should be. Absolutely. Great job, big thanks. We are using the Strahd material, in love with the voices, a bit hard to translate to Brazilian accent Portuguese, but it's leveling our game to another level. Heck yeah. So unfortunately I don't speak Portuguese. I know a little bit of Spanish, and it's funny, Spanish to Portuguese is kind of like, I guess that would be, Spanish to, or maybe like English to German in a sense. Like, same lettering, but, just a little bit different, and you can't exactly tell. I recently joined a new campaign, and our DM let us roll stats. Write the stats down, and people can choose any of the stats people rolled. Interesting. Very, very group-oriented. Very, that makes me think, like, that'd be really cool if you had exactly 6 players, and then you rolled 6 times, and you had to take 1 roll from each person, because then basically that'd be like a game of like, oh, hey, like, I don't want to take all the good stats. I'll take that person's good stat, and then I'll take that person's bad stat kind of thing. I think that could be a really fun team building exercise, which inevitably would be destroyed if you had one power gamer that just screwed over everybody. But what you do then is you just kick that person out because you don't want to play that person. Like any of the sets of stats. Cool. Hello, question. Have you dealt with any mechanics for corruption? Yes. So I play a game called Dungeon Crawl Classics, and in that game, there is corruption. So basically, if you cast a spell and you roll terribly, then you begin to become magically corrupted. So I've dealt with corruption in that game system. In regards of 5e, the only corruption I've really dealt with was more along the lines of curses that were inflicted upon the party, and that slowly affected them over time. What I'll say is 5e is very strange in how curses work, and maybe you can tag that down to corruption, because there is that spell called Remove Curse. I think Remove Curse definitely lends itself to just doing away with a lot of potential fun mechanics in the game. So that's definitely something you got to talk with your players with on, do curses affect the players for a long time? How does corruption work? And also, very, very importantly, is does corruption make a character so unplayable to the point where people get sick of playing that character and just want to roll up a new one? That's also something very important you need to discuss, because there can be a point where your character gets corrupted and then they can't do these actions, and then they have negative stats, and then they just basically suck to play. What point do you allow them to, roll up something else because the character that they're currently using just is terrible? The campaign is mostly role players, so power gaming isn't a big issue. Hey, that's awesome. It's always great to get a group of people that aren't into power gaming. Because sadly, I find that no matter the system, no matter the game, whether this be a video game, board game, tabletop role-playing game, I do find that power gaming ultimately burns you out on the game. I think the best way to describe it would be, coincidentally, Dark Souls here. If you played Dark Souls and you immediately looked at a wiki and you saw that this weapon's the best and picking these stats are the best way to make that weapon the best, then you basically just keep locking into the same thing over and over. But if I play Dark Souls, oh, cool, that weapon looks cool, I'm going to pick up a whip. Oh, hey, that armor looks neat on me, I'm going to wear that. I think, that for me, it makes me want to go back to playing Dark Souls versus saying, oh, hey, there's a new, if I'm on New Game Plus 7, I need to be using this weapon, and I need to use this magic, Alrighty, moving on to the next question on my list here. What is your technique for customizing off-the-shelf adventures? So, as many of you know, I run a lot of I've ran all of the what do you call those things? The 5e adventure modules. And that's where my channel essentially kicked off from. What do I do to make them, customize them? First things first, I read them, and then I quickly realize what I like about them and what I don't like about them. I'm not going to read something and say, hey, it's in the book, I've got to run it this way. No. If I read something and I immediately think to myself, man, that's going to be boring for the players, it's going to be boring for me, that's going to be boring, immediately just cut it and do something else with it. Either just cut it completely, warp some things around, allow for more player autonomy, allow for this, allow for that, do various things. But that's my number one technique is I look through that whole book and immediately just start checkboxing, hey, that looks boring, that looks dumb, that looks lame. And also very importantly too, number two I guess on this is when it comes to customizing the adventures, you need to understand what the players are wanting. Because, for example, I've ran TOA, Tomb of Annihilation, 3 times now. I've ran it for 3 different groups, and each group has had different wants, needs, and desires in the game. So while I may run it one way for one group, I'm not going to run it the other way for the other group. So I may cut content based on, oh, they don't want to do a whole bunch of random encounters, so I'm going to cut the random encounters. Oh, they don't want PCs dying, so I'm going to tone down the lethality. Oh, they don't want this or that. So, 1, recognizing what's boring, and 2, recognizing what the players want out of the game. That is what I would say. There's that madness table in the DMG which could be useful for corruption. Yeah, so there's some fun madness things in there, such as, you've got an invisible friend, and you start to see things, and this and that. There's definitely a lot of that. What I would say is if you're looking for very much more in-depth chart on madness, check out Call of Cthulhu, because Call of Cthulhu is all about dealing with sanity and horror and madness. And the DMG table is only a D20 table, but Call of Cthulhu, I believe, does have, in fact, a D100 plus table. Another, how have you dealt with invisible PCs and NPCs for detecting and attacking? Assuming you don't have a, I assume that says don't have a C invisibility yet. Been a constant debate when it comes up. So what I do is, if someone's invisible, that doesn't prevent them from making noise. So if you are, let's say, a warrior, fighting type, and you're still swinging your sword around, you're still generating noise because you're moving around in your armor, you're swinging, you're probably grunting. So people know where you are. people know, okay, you're standing in that general vicinity, especially if someone's like stabbing you. Then you typically know where they're stabbing you from, even if you don't see it, because the blade glanced that way, and then blood spurted everywhere. So what I would say is, if they are generating noise actively, then boom, no, they know where they are, but ultimately 5e in particular, if someone's invisible, you're gonna have disadvantage attacking them, and also, very importantly, is there's a whole bunch of spells and a whole bunch of features that specifically say a creature you can see. So if there is an effect, an ability, a feat, a trait, or whatever that specifically says a creature you can see, even though you know their general area, you cannot use that ability. Simple as that. So what I would suggest is, if someone's invisible and your players are trying to perceive where they are, you can maybe make it, a bonus action, maybe make it a full action to roll a perception check to see exactly where they are. But mind you, that perception check is specifically going to be for hearing, and hearing may be disrupted on the battlefield, because trying to pinpoint where someone is, when there's a fireball going off and there's that, Hydra that's yelling and screaming, that's going to be a little bit difficult. So ultimately, invisible creatures are hard to pin down, but not impossible. They are generating noise. DM question: how often do you make up your own magic? Example: this area has spooky mist, where the effect doesn't really fall under spell verse. Do you meta to clarify plot points? So one, I incorporate magic all the time that the players will never understand what it is and never be able to cast. I ultimately always say that magic should be magical, but unfortunately, in our tabletop role-playing games, and specifically 5e in this case, the magic is no longer magic because it's codified. Players can look up all these spells, and once you look up a spell, it's no longer magical because they understand it. I don't think magic should be understandable, or at least not all of it anyway. So yeah, all the time, like for example, being a mist. There being a magical mist that does X, Y, and Z ability, right there. That is great. I love that stuff. I do that all the time. Whether that be, area effects, all the time, enemy spellcasters, all the time, enemy monsters, enemy whatever. I love having magic in a world that is totally not air quo per the book, per the rules. Now, 2, do you meta to clarify plot points? It comes down to the players. There are some players who do not want to think when they're playing. There is certainly a lot of players who simply want to show up to the table, show up to the adventure, and have a good time. In which case, yeah, I say, hey, okay, so as you're walking through, there you see tattered clothing, and an investigative group might be thinking, okay, what does that tattered cloth, mean? Who does that belong to? What does this mean? What does that mean? But a group that doesn't want to think, I would just simply say, that cloth right there resembles Lord Reginald. Lord Reginald came through here recently. So it comes down to the individual group. But yes, absolutely, I've clarified plot points as being clear as day for some people, because some people just want to go from point A to point B and get into a fight and get into a monologue, and that's it. And that's perfectly fine. Alrighty, moving on to the next question on my list here. I don't know if this is a weird one. What are your top 3 to 5 rules you have when you run a campaign? 1, have fun. 2, understand that you're playing with other players. 3, show up to every single session with the intent to move forward. 4, understand your character. And 5, I guess 5 would probably be along the lines of basically, I guess the best way to describe it would be just roping everyone into the adventure. I run a lot of different people through a lot of different games, and a lot of people just a lot of people just have a different mindset about what the game is. Some people think showing up to the table is all about, being a dumb rogue that tries to sleep with everyone. Some people show up to the table and think that There's no role play involved. It's literally just go to the next room, fight, 2d12 orcs. So many people have different expectations about what the game is. So it's really important to understand, like, get everyone on the same page. It's important in that session 0 and the session whatever that everyone shows up and understands what the game's going to be about, because when you have a mishmash of what the game is about, some people want the orcs, and some people want the heavy role play, and some people want the plot points, some people want the sandbox, then it just doesn't work. So getting everyone on board is the way to go. Invisibility drops the moment you attack, get hit. Yeah, so regular invisibility, but there is also greater invisibility. So gotta watch out for that. Can you search Gingy says get yo buns out on Google? Heck no. Heck no. Soft magic systems are great. Yeah, for sure. What's your favorite way to start out a campaign and have the characters meet? That comes down to, once again, the individual people. I would say, like, one of my favorite things is simply saying you already know each other. Because that just gets over the hump. That immediately just gets over the whole thing of, oh, I'm in so-and-so, I'm this and that, oh, because a lot of the times, or at least for some of the groups that I've ran, you already know what the other people are bringing to the table because they talked about it. They said, oh, I'm bringing a bard that does this and acts like that. Or, oh, I'm the fighter with a, heart of gold. Oh, I'm the this, I'm the that. So instead of going over the minutia of Eric Quo spending all this time on these introductions, which were practically like double introducing ourselves, instead of doing all that, a simple way would just be to say, hey, you already know each other, and we're going to start off session 1 with an adventure. Another of my most favorite ways to actually getting people to meet, all the characters to meet, is through a level 0 adventure. In a level 0 adventure, everyone is a peasant or a nobody or whatever, and they all come together for a reason, and they all go off on an adventure where, they get maimed and killed, and then the survivors band together as a group of adventurers. I like that approach because, depending on the adventure, there's a reason why they met up. Oh, did they meet up because the local bandit, was harassing the town and they all had to band together? Oh, what did they all have to go, down into the cave and fight the dragon? Oh, did all the peasants have to gather to do whatever? I really like that approach because building the background together is so fantastic because you just grab nobodies, they go off on an adventure, then boom, they are somebody. Instead of going through that whole, 10-page backstory drama, instead of going through all of that, you just simply have, the background is built for the players. Alrighty. Alrighty, moving on to the next one. You interested in looking at adventures and supplements for other systems rather than just 5e? Yes, I did in fact actually have a plan to go through the Alphabet series of AD&D. For those of you that don't know, the original modules for D&D were not 300-page tomes of adventures that took you from 1 to 15. They were not these grandiose things with overarching villains for entirety of a campaign. The original D&D adventures were anywhere between, 1 to maybe 5-10 session adventures that were just simply printed for use in a continuing campaign. And quite frankly, that's the style of play that I prefer. I personally prefer less over more. I truly do think that the 5e modules are way too big for their own good. And I think that, unfortunately, they lend to this idea that you need to sit down for, 50, 100 sessions to run a campaign, when that is not the case. I think that adventures being much smaller and much more pocket-sized is so much better. I think it's a lot healthier for the community. I think it's a lot healthier for the tables because what ends up happening is, as we all know, most groups fail. most D&D games put together are eventually going to burn out after a few sessions. So instead of trying to set up this idea of running a 50 to 100 page, or 150 session campaign, just start off small and build up on those experiences. Throw small adventures into a large campaign, not one large adventure at one large campaign. So I'm definitely thinking about doing reviews and guides on those. Alrighty. Ooh-wee. For those of you that don't know, I do sit on the ground, and I do have to constantly stretch and move about a little bit because sitting on the ground does, in fact, suck. Alrighty, next one. What do you feel tabletop role-playing games give that other mediums of entertainment don't? Control. So, going back to the Dark Souls thing, it doesn't matter how much creative thinking I put into Dark Souls, because at the end of the day, I've only got the two attacks. I've got the light attack and the heavy attack, right? But when it comes to D&D, when it comes to all tabletop role-playing games, there is the idea that anything is possible. The sky's the limit. Imagination can carry you. The idea that oh so long ago, the idea of running a tabletop role-playing game that was just such a revolutionary idea. The fact that we went from a war game with codified rules of, hey, the monster is here, or the battalion's here, and they fight that other battalion, and then all of a sudden that transitioned over to, oh, hey, I've got like a fighter, and my fighter is actually gonna pull out a rope and then stretch it across the cave, and I'm gonna lure someone to me, and they're gonna trip on it, and then I'm gonna stab them. Like, that right there is just, it speaks absolute volumes about the ideas of what gaming means. And the unfortunate part is, all of us, and when I say us, I'm saying like maybe people that are like 40 and younger, right? We all grew up on video games that are codified. We all grew up on video games that are strict with their rules. And unfortunately, I see a lot of that carry over to tabletop role-playing games. I see a lot of people, unfortunately, when they make the transition over to playing a tabletop role-playing game, they bring over that structure and rigidity and stare at the rules and think that the rules are the end-all and be-all, when that is not the case. We need to throw away the rules when they do not serve the narrative. We need to throw out the rules when someone comes up with such a creative design. And, as I just mentioned, the whole, like, the fighter pulls out some rope and then, puts it on the ground floor to trip somebody. Immediately, I can immediately hear people thinking to themselves, oh, hey, how do I put that in a rule? How does the enemy have to roll a save? Or, oh, do you have to roll a save to set up the trap? Or, oh, do this and that. I think, honestly, more rules just get in the way of what makes a good adventure. So that is what I truly love that tabletop role-playing gives, is the freedom of choice. I love that. And I think we need to, I know there's a lot of people that love rules, and power to them. People love Pathfinder, it's got rules for days, and it's got flow charts on how grappling works, and you can, when you create your character, you can do this and that, and this and that. But I personally, I truly do believe that less is more. Have you implemented skill challenges before? If so, types. I'm looking to add a Trial of Faith, I think Last Crusade type. I found a few, but always curious what other DMs do. Absolutely. In fact, I actually run skill challenges in nearly every single session of 5e that I've ran in the past, I don't know, maybe like a year and change, I guess. So what I'll say for skill challenges is make them abstract. Because unfortunately, as I just mentioned, there is a lot of people who immediately try and apply the game's rules. A lot of people immediately try to gamify something that I don't think should be gamified. So when it comes to you doing a trial of faith, crusade style, I would immediately go along the lines of, okay, as you are walking, you see glyphs along the walls. I need you to roll me a history check to see if you can figure out, the correct pattern. And then after they succeed or fail on that, then they go on to, okay, as you are moving about to the trap-laden area, I need you to roll me an acrobatics check as you try to navigate around. And as you go over the pit, then I need you to roll me a constitution save to see if you are able to stand still and all. I would continuously work on that, and I would absolutely refuse to let people say, okay, so I'm actually, in this trap area. Am I allowed to, run along the walls and do this and that? Can I cast that spell? I'd immediately just refute that and be like, hey, if you've got an ability, maybe that gives you a bonus to your check. Or if you've got a spell, maybe that means a success or, or an easier check. Once again, I would go along those lines, but just make it feel organic and take them away from their character sheet. Because, I think when it comes to skill challenges, it should come down to the character, not the character sheet. That's what I would say. That's a good idea, and something I still tend to do over a grand campaign. Absolutely. The adventurous thing, absolutely. I like Pathfinder because despite the rules, they have a lot of creativity and player options. The rules aren't actually limiting. For sure. I run a lot of skill challenges. Remember to always make it harder than you think you need because your players are going to inevitably wreck you. Players' job is to wreck you. That's their thing. Question. Opinion on using Time Ravage on Final Battle in Curse of Strahd. Time Ravage, I'm trying to remember that spell off the top of my head, but what I'll say is, when it comes to the final battle of anything, ever, this doesn't even mean Curse of Strahd, just literally any final battle ever, throw the kitchen sink at them. Throw anything and everything at them. Throw in what you truly will think and believe will make that fight memorable. Because I can't tell you how many people have come to me and I've seen talk about complaining about a final ending villain or, adventure module or whatever. The final villain being lame. Because, once again, purely as written, a lot of villains suck. Purely as written, a lot of endgame bosses aren't really endgame bosses because Wiz doesn't know how to balance the final boss, and your players are overpowered, and this and that. So throw everything at them. Absolutely. Just what I'd say to make a boss fight good is terrain, mechanics, minions, and also very importantly is resources. How many resources do your players have? Are they going full in? Because if your players are going full in on a boss when they're at a high level, they've got way too many things going on for them, unfortunately. Especially if they're 11th level and higher, they have so many spells, traits, features, abilities that just completely just nova things down. So, yeah, if you think that Time Ravage would be a good one to throw in there, then absolutely do it. One of the better things of 5e is that it puts the game back in the hands of the table, the DM, and the players. We lost that in 3.5 and 4e. It takes me a long time to prep, add things to the module I'm running. Any shortcuts to making characters, prepping a session? Shortcuts to prepping a session. What I'll say about shortcuts to prepping a session is something I do personally whenever I'm going to prep a campaign. Specifically, I'm saying campaign here, is I do a lot of the grunt work immediately, right from the get-go, about, okay, here's the overarching adventure. Here is where they're definitely going to go at some points. Here are the monsters that they're going to be fighting. Here are the locales. Here's the this, here's the that. I do a lot of the prep right from the get-go ahead of time. But when it comes to the session-by-session prep, I honestly go with the idea of putting in just enough to last that session and to tease out a little bit more. I always go with the idea that Don't prep, don't prep, 10 sessions down the line. It's better to prep for the here and now. And also, very importantly, is also when you begin to understand who your players are, you can find out those little things that stall the party. And what do I mean by that? There's unfortunately a thing where if you prep, you could be prepping for 4 hours, making maps and villains and this and that, and your players just turn the other way and all that prep is wasted. And then there's also the other thing of you prep for 5 minutes thinking about, oh, hey, wouldn't that be funny to throw in Boblin the Goblin? And then Boblin the Goblin takes up your player's next 4 hours because they go bar crawling with him, and then they get mugged, and then that ensues into a combat, and then they go and, have a chance meeting with the king, right? Understand your players and maximize most to their preferences. And prep the adventure that that they're going to run. Prep the adventure that is going to stall them. But most important of all, ask them, whether immediately after the session or in between the sessions, ask your players, hey, what are you guys going to do next? Do not just go blind. Go purposely ask your players, what are they going to do next? And then build on that, and then hold them to that. And if they try to, like let's say you ask them, hey, what are you going to do next? And they all say, oh yeah, we're going to go to that next town because we heard that they've got a zombie problem. And the next session they say, you know what, instead of that, what if we go to that other town that's full of, bars that we're going to go bar crawling in? Then you do sit there and say, hey guys, I prepped for this. You told me we're going to do that. Let's do that instead. As immersion breaking as that may be, there is, just the fact of the matter is you can only run what you've prepped. So run what you prepped and ask them what they want prepped, and then you will prep it. That is my advice for that. Alrighty, moving on to the next question here. Any spells/items you don't like to use because maybe it's too powerful? What I'll say to that is, purely as written, for running a air quote generic 5e fantasy adventure full of high acting, action, fuel, and whatever, I don't think that there is any too powerful spells or abilities or items or whatever. I personally don't care. And that got me a lot of flack over the whole Silvery Barbs thing. But what I will say is, that is just for the generic 5e, pulpy, high-octane action-adventure 5e fantasy, game. When it comes to running a specific type of adventure, if you want to run a, survival adventure, if you want to run the hex crawl adventure, if you want to run the hardcore gritty adventure, you want to run the dark, nasty adventure, there is, in fact, a lot of spells and a lot of items that do away with themes. A perfect example being, if you want a survival game where your players have to forage and hunt and craft and do all these things, then of course there's several spells that just completely nullify anything like that. You can't have Goodberry, you can't have Crave Food and Water, you can't have Purify, you can't have Lehman's Tiny Hut, you can't have the Outlander thing. You can't have a lot of those. If you want to run the dark and gritty PCs dying left and right game, then yeah, there's certain spells that will certainly negate that, such as, Revivifies, or maybe some healing spells, or, features in the game like death saves and stuff like that. So what I'll say to that is, the spells and items and whatever, those are only too powerful based on the type of adventure you want to run. And that's something I think a lot of people need to pick up on a lot more, is that 5e runs a specific style of adventure. It runs a specific style of game. Unfortunately, you cannot pick up 5e and run certain styles of adventures in games because the game just simply doesn't allow it that way. If you want to run a specific style of game, you're going to have to modify it. Sometimes minorly, but sometimes drastically. As mentioned before, the whole survival thing, when it comes to 5e, it doesn't matter how much damage you take in a day, because the next day you wake up all cheeky, and peachy. You have to change up the rest system. You need to change up, how you forage. You need to change up how you find shelter. You need to change up how long it takes to get these abilities back. You need to change all these things. So, in that degree, yes, there's a bunch of things that are too powerful depending on the style of adventure that you're trying to run. Okay, very true. Thank you for your insight. Thank you. Extra question related to current topic. Do you think Circle of the Moon Druids are extremely OP at low-level adventures? Man, yeah, so Moon Druids in particular have a humongous HP pool. They, in fact, have a larger HP pool than Barbarians, which is astounding because typically Barbarians have the largest health pool and they double, essentially, their health because they take half damage. But Moon Druids just flat out have their own HP pool, and then they have the the things that they become's HP pool, which is typically like bears at low level stuff. So Moon Druids being OP, they're pretty freaking good, is what I'll say. When it comes to the word overpowered in a in a non-competitive sense, that comes down to what the players are after. And we've all, I'm sure you've all seen this. I'm sure you've all heard it. There are players out there who purposely make a build for 5e and say, "Oh, this is so broken. I can't wait to do this. This is going to be awesome. I'm way stronger." Those people are the ones that I think ruin the game for the other people that don't want to do that. So what I'll say to that is, Moon Druid is OP for the people that do that. Moon Druid's OP for the people that say, "Oh yes, I'm going to transform into exactly this, beast, and then I'm going to do these spells, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that." Then it's OP. But it's not OP for the person that says, "Oh, I took this because I want to transform into a deer. And then, maybe later on I'll transform into a moose." And, it's not OP for them. It's OP to the individuals, but not to the, the masses is what I'd say. Do you have any tips from running underwater or space arcs as part of a regular campaign of 5e? What I'll say is, I love underwater because underwater allows you to work in 3 dimensions where normally you're operating on boots on the ground. I actually made a whole video about underwater encounters and combat and stuff like that. But what I'll say now is, if you want to make it a truly foreign place, then don't give them the spell or the item or the feat or whatever that nullifies everything. Because, when we run typical adventures where your players are going into the cave and fighting the monster, they already are operating under these blanket rules that they've operated on many times before. But if you want to run a new thing, then have them deal with that. Have them deal with the disadvantage on the attacks. Have them deal with the having to breathe underwater. Have them deal with the reduced movement speed. Have them deal with the currents, and have them deal with these things that make it actually underwater. What I always say is, whenever you're running a encounter in a location, make that location matter. Because if you're just running an underwater encounter where it's essentially a 25 by 25 square grid and they operate under the same rules, then it's boring. But they're going to remember that time where they went underwater and they're having to hold their breath and the shark's zooming past and there's that heat geyser which is spilling out and hurting people. They're going to remember that. I promise you. Alrighty, next question. What's your favorite cannon fodder monster? Whew, favorite cannon fodder monster. I would say my favorite cannon fodder monster would be... Yeah, that's a tough one. Maybe kobolds. I do like me some kobolds. Kobolds are pretty fun because they can be a little bit tricksy. You can set up traps and they can run away. Oh, goodness. Maybe kobolds. I think I like them more than goblins, is what I'll say. I don't like goblins as much as cannon fodder. Very cool to catch you live. Just want to say thanks for the great DM guides. Thank you, Word. Lizard Folk OP. Thank God they got nerfed. Hey, that Cunning Artisan, that thing was ruining games, let me tell you. Lizard Folk were just coming in here, biting people and carving up little javelins and whatever else. OP. Speaking of that, as I was just mentioning, for the whole survival thing, like having a lizard... I need to go back here. Exploration is the worst pillar of 5e D&D. Here's why. When it comes to exploration, in regards of, moving about, in regards of exploring, in regards of this and that, there are so few rules on it. There's so few rules on, what it means to dungeon crawl. There's so few rules on what it means to hex crawl. And here's the thing. There are next to no features, traits, abilities, or spells that enhance the exploration. In fact, the majority of features, spells, traits, and abilities take away from exploration. A perfect example being the Lost system. It technically in 5e, your players, the characters can get lost. But guess what? If you got a ranger in the party, you can't get lost. Going on to foraging. Oh, you players have to forage. But guess what? If you got the spell, then you don't have to forage. A whole bunch of things like that are in the game to reduce a whole pillar of D&D that is nearly non-existent. And then Cunning Artisan was, interesting enough, one of the few things that I would say added to the exploration side of things because it was a part of a crafting system, and they removed it. So that tells me where Wizards of the Coast, places exploration. They don't care about exploration. And I think that's perfectly fine. But for the people who want exploration, they have to do a bit more digging and find people and, things like that actually enhance that pillar of D&D. Love the guides. I love you commenting and watching and subscribing. Thank you, Archer's friend. Alrighty, next question. What's a technique you want to do when running a tabletop role-playing game but don't know how? What's a technique I want to do when running a game but don't know how? That's an interesting question. So what do I want to do? I want to describe the undescribable. So what do I mean by that? When you are running a game, and I think the best way to describe this is a book versus a movie. In a book, every single piece of detailed information is laid out to the viewer because that's the only way you can perceive it. You have to read the text at hand. A movie can have a visual and an auditorial way of introducing a idea. So I think a perfect example of that being the Harry Potter movies. In the Harry Potter books, when you read them, you pick up all the information that was placed on the page. But when you watch the movies, there's, interesting enough, some things in the movies that would not be able to be translated over to the books, such as a character moving in a certain way, which is not, indicative of the foreground, or a thing on the wall that foreshadows something. Because if you wrote it, then the person would immediately pick up on that. But when you watch it and maybe you listen to it or hear it or whatever the case may be, then it's a bit different. So I need to figure out the best way to present things to the table without making it abundantly obvious. That's what I need to figure out. What's my most anticipated TTRPG book coming out in the near future? Mine. My own book that I'm writing. For those of you that don't know, I am working on a hex crawl mega dungeon. And that one I will be, I believe, kickstartering or, crowdfunding or whatever. But I won't be kickstarting or crowdfunding that until it is 80% complete. But that is what I've got looking forward to in the near future. So totally selling myself here, but I think it's going to be a dope product. Also, thank you from me too. Your Rhyme the Frostbane guides have been super useful to me. Thank you, Ash. I still use 1E Wilderness and Dungeoneer Guide of Exploration, as you should. You know, early D&D exploration was a huge deal. It, in fact, was truly an equal pillar of the game. Yeah, I've gone through his Rime of the Frostmaiden playlist like 12 times running it. Rime of the Frostmaiden, what a classic. What a classic there. I started running that, as soon as it came out. I saw its glaring issues, but I saw that it has a lot of charm, and Rime of the Frostmaiden is definitely one of my more favorite adventures, though I know critically, purely as written by the book, it's not one of the best adventures, sadly. It's a little bit too much of a hodgepodge. It's a little bit too much of a not leaning into what makes a 5e adventure work well, I believe. Alrighty, moving on to the last question I got from my Discord, but I'm still, open to more here in the chat. What's your opinion on subsystems in tabletop role-playing games that work different to the core mechanics, and in some cases, doesn't interact with the core mechanics at all? So, looking at this, I'm thinking now of... Man, that's a tough one. I mean, I really want to look at an example. I've got examples on the tip of my tongue, but I get what you're asking here. And what I'll say is, I'm okay with subsystems that work different to the core mechanics, because then it adds variety. Especially if the core mechanics are very both linear and small. If the core mechanics are huge and then they tag on even more, then probably not. But if it's very linear in, this is always how this works, this is always how this works, this is always how this works, and then you get a subsystem that says, oh, but instead of that, you can do this, I'm okay with that. But in cases it doesn't interact with the core mechanics at all, I'd have to think about that. I think you know what? Honestly, I think a good example of this is mass warfare and combat in D&D. So in D&D, when you roll initiative, it's your person and you go up against those forces and so and so. But then how do you handle mass combat? How do you handle your player characters being a part of a 200-man, company facing off against another 200-man company? Then how does that work? Do you then have to use a separate system to calculate the damages and, what abilities can you use during this time? Once again, I think that can be done well. For example, I run old school, stuff, like old school essentials, essentially, original D&D and stuff like that. There is stuff like that in the game, where you have your characters join up in a, unit, and you essentially don't run them like an individual anymore. I think those can work well, but I think when they work not well, they clearly show how not good they are. So what I'll say is, it works well, it's good. It doesn't work well, it's not good. Simple as that. Classic is one way to put it. Do you use or gather inspiration or ideas from old Dragon or Dungeon magazines? Yes, I do. In fact, my magazine, which is No Fun's Guide to Everything, I drew inspiration from it. And also, I'm super annoyed that the thing isn't grayed out. I have to fix that. Yes, so I absolutely draw inspiration from that, for sure. There we go. Perfect. So Dungeon and Dragon magazine, for those of you that don't know, was the original, basically, supplement for D&D. There was a whole bunch of classic things, such as new subclasses, new races, new features, new game systems, articles on how to run the game and play the game, new adventures, basically just a whole hodgepodge of fantastic stuff. And I am modeling my magazine after that. And I certainly have looked through some of those. Obviously, not all of them translate to today's day and age, because, a lot of them are, not a lot of them, but there's a decent amount of the topics that are specifically for a pre-internet world and also a pre-5e world. But there are still a lot of great ideas to be taken from classic Dungeon and Dragon magazine. Alrighty. Do you have a favorite common magic item? Common magic item. Favorite common magic item? I would say I don't like things that add nothing. And don't add any new like actions or traits or features or anything like that. Like the +1 sword is mechanically good, but it's also mechanically boring. I would say probably a good common magic item would be some sort of potion that you imbibe that lets you do something else, not just make you what you do better. That's what I would say. Looking for ways to challenge an 11th level optimized party. Do you change stat blocks because many saves are auto fails for big bads? So what I'll say is, for an 11th level party, it really does come down to there is no monster that you could throw at them that is going to be a fair and fun fight. Not going to happen. Not a single monster. The only way to challenge an 11th level party is to hammer them down over the course of the day, whether that be just, 1, 2, 3 encounters or whatever. You need to make them burn their resources over time, or you cannot have a single monster fight the party. It's unfortunate because when we think about D&D, a lot of times we think about 4 PCs that are epic going up against the one big bad, but quite frankly, just D&D doesn't work like that. You cannot have one big bad. You need to have an environment that hurts the party. You need to have minions to bog down the party. You need to have actions that the boss can use to get out of harm's way. You need to bump up the legendary resistances. You need to bump up the saves. You need to bump up the actions. You need to do so many things. And that's honestly why most D&D 5e games do not go past a certain level, because the amount of work you have to do to make a air quote challenging experience is pretty drastic. While at the same time, if you go just a little bit too overboard, then you just wipe them, right? Like, oh, you bump up the dragon's damage. Like, that's cool and all, but if you bump up the dragon's damage, then it might one-shot people. And if you one-shot, like, half the party, is that even a fun, experience? Because half the people aren't even getting to play the game? That's a tough one. Yeah, I was going to ask about mass warfare. I have used strongholds and followers, and I find it running during combat just slows things down. Any way you run armies in 5e, that works well. What I'll say is, running armies, I think, should be... Man, so I understand what Matt Colville was doing, where basically, like, the players have the initiative, and then the armies on the side have their initiative. I get that. But 5e combat already runs a long time. Let's be honest here, folks. 5e combat takes forever. So adding time to that, just, that might not be the play, Chuck. What you might do instead is just have initiative of, the players doing, combat, and then have combat be separate. Maybe you make it so that combat is its own separate entity and force. Have it be where... combat, mass combat in particular, where your players are controlling their armies and their little companies and platoons or whatever else. When they're controlling these units, then it's a different game. Because, once again, 5e combat takes a long time. Don't make combat even longer. But as for ways to run it, I mean, I would say just have it be its own separate entity. I think that unfortunately the mesh of 5e combat and more mechanics just makes more mechanics. You know what I'm saying? Any subclasses you ban? What I would say to that is I haven't banned any subclasses for any of my games recently. But, once again, harkening back to the style and theme and tone and setting of a campaign, there are definitely some subclasses I would ban for sure. If I was trying to run a campaign that had X theme, I would ban Y. I think off the top of my head, something that maybe comes to mind would be if I was saying, hey, like we're going to run a low fantasy thing, then flat out no artificer. If I was going to say, hey, we're going to run a hardcore, survival thing, then maybe no Twilight Cleric, because the Twilight Cleric, sees too much and gives out too much temp HP, things like that. So I personally haven't banned any subclasses for just a general overall purpose, but I understand why some subclasses are in fact banned. Rod of Holding, Immovable Rod, good items. It's hard to balance. I meant common from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, like the Cloak of Billowing, just fun items. Oh yeah, Cloak of Billowing's pretty good. There's like a shield that like smiles or frowns. I believe there's like a wand that like no, I think it's the Wand of Smiles and Frowns. I think I like that one a lot. That one's a pretty good one. Other than that, trying to remember off the top of my head, the Cloak of Billowing. There's like a shield, the wand. Is there anything else of that nature that I really like? I mean, Cloak of Billowing is just awesome, right? Like, how can you go wrong with that? How can you go wrong? Alrighty, I'm going to say that I'm going to wrap this Q&A up in 4 minutes. So if you have any burning questions you have of me, then start spilling them, because I've got a bunch of things going on in my life today, unfortunately. Question, I'm about to run Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I've been running through your guides and love it. Curious if you are familiar with Blades of Darkness adaptation made for 5e for doing heist any good. What I would say is, not to spoil anything for the chat here, but heist is certainly a word. It's certainly a term, right? And whether Waterdeep Dragon Heist is an actual heist as we think of it, like Ocean's 11, that's certainly subjective. What I would say is, for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, make the heist part of it what works well for your table and what works what they want it to be. Blades of Darkness. I haven't read through fully all of that stuff, but I imagine it could be a very good supplement for running a heist, for sure. Question, how do you feel about giving a artifact level magic item to the players from the beginning of the campaign as a plot hook? I dig it. I typically, for almost all the campaigns that I run, I give my players a powerful magical item because it gives them a sentimental thing. It gives them a reason, to adventure. And if I take it away from them, then that gives them a drive to get it back. Now, that being said, though, depending on the type of item, specifically if it is like only a single item, like let's say you give out like a badass sword, then that might be a little bit lame if, the fighter gets a badass sword, but then like the wizard gets nothing, right? So definitely you got to be careful with how the artifact or artifacts balance the game, because if you give the fighter something, but then the cleric gets something even better, then the fighter feels sad. You know what I'm saying? It's always a game of trying to make everyone at the table feel awesome, but unfortunately, the way you run the game dictates what classes are going to work well and what don't work well. Something I can't remember if I made a video on this or not, but I think the best way to say this bluntly and as offensively as possible is people run the game in a way to make the classes bad. And unfortunately, and I'm going to stand by this, a lot of people run 5e in a way that makes the fighter bad. A lot of people. And how do they go about running the game in a way that makes the fighter bad? A lot of people run it where you get into one encounter a day and all of the monsters just dunk down on the fighter. When you run a game where you only get into one encounter a day, then the classes that have high burst stuff like paladins and wizards and whoever else, they excel But then, unfortunately, the people who their whole class identity is maintaining over the course of time, they, in fact, are weaker. So, one, a lot of people run the game in a way that the fighter is bad like that. And two, then a whole bunch of monsters have the classic tagline of multi-attack, 2 claws, 1 bite. And then those always target the fighter, and then the fighter gets beat up. So the fighter is, one, not shining because they aren't getting to do what their class is supposed to do, and then two, they get beat up far more frequently than everyone else. So that's what I would say. I'm glad to catch you live. Thanks for all your content as its first class. Thank you. Thank you so very much, Scott. Alrighty, Ash. Do you usually run stealth skill rolls for group checks, or individual checks? I do group. So, and funnily enough, I actually just encountered this yesterday. I had someone say, hey, I want to scout ahead. And I said, yeah, that's fine. So they did an individual stealth check. And they scouted out a little bit ahead of them. But then they said, oh, maybe I should go on further. And I just bluntly told them, hey, if you go further, that means you're going to be leaving the other players behind. So I think it's very important that you rope everyone into the adventure as much as possible at any given time. But two, what I'll say is group checks I think are really good because when you run individual checks, you know, some people are just inevitably going to fail. But when you run group checks, then you can make the people that, you know, do well, make them feel awesome for helping out their friends. And this doesn't just apply to stealth checks. This could also apply to, you know, whatever style check. It could be the people that roll really well, helping out the people that don't roll well at all. But for stealth in particular, I typically go down the line of, hey, you know, the majority needs to succeed, and you're good to go. Even if someone rolls a nat 1 and they're in plate armor, I don't care if 3 other people rolled, you know, plus 20, right? Thanks, boss. Your stuff is fantastic. I appreciate your time. Thank you so very much. Alrighty, I am going to hit the off button in just a minute. So if anyone has any last second questions, if anybody's got anything going on. As I type into a thing there. Yep, if anybody's got any one last thing, that's going to do it for me. I burned through a whole bunch of questions here. And then we will be Gucci for today. For those of you that don't follow me on the Patreon, I am going to be releasing regular scheduled content pretty soon here. I am going to go back to doing all the content guides, and I'm going to put out all that fantastic stuff. For those of you that do follow me on the Patreon, and for those of you thinking about it, I'm releasing No Fun's Guide to Everything, a monthly zine filled with a whole bunch of goodies for your game, including subclasses, including new features, including new items, including new monsters, new adventures, new tons of things like that. So if you want to help me out, keep the lights on around here, then check that out. Thanks for the stream. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Great Q&A session. Glad I catch this. Thank you. Thank you all so very much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for everything that you are doing, because you all help me out in any way, shape, or form. If you're here and listening to this, you are, without a shadow of a doubt, helping me. So thank you all. Capability, heck yeah. Alrighty, thanks for the stream. Really appreciate all the advice. Thank you, thank you. Alrighty, I think that's going to do it for me today. This was a blast. I got to answer a whole bunch of questions. If you need art for that zine, hit me up. I will. I am, right as of right this second, I'm poor, but once I become not poor, I will be commissioning art all the time. Absolutely. Alrighty. That is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are incredible. Thank you all for watching, listening, subscribing. Thank you for doing all those things, because you help me out so very much. But that is going to do it for it today. And I can't wait to see you all next time.